Welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Frank talk about sex and dating.
Hello, everyone. Tamara here. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Quentin, and we'll be talking about dating and relationship advice for guys. If you like this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. Thanks for joining me, Quentin.
Hi, how's it going?
It was good. Glad you could come on. And I like the advice you had offered to people in the past, and they may or may not have taken it. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to give your wisdom to others who may actually listen to it.
Yeah, it's crazy how people don't like to take the advice of people who just sit and watch and observe things. It's like, come on, guys. Like, I'm right. Why are you booing me?
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm one of those people too that sit back and observe. You can see a lot for sure, and for sure. All right.
Yeah. Sorry,
no, I was saying that I know we started talking about some of the advice was they kind of feel like suffocated in relationships, like mostly talking to guy friends about either their girlfriends. I'm not sure if they're wives or girlfriends, but just kind of want to share about like why they think that, or what they say about it, and what you had to say about it.
Yeah. So I've had a handful of friends who get into relationships, and then things start out really well for them, from my perspective, because I only know them, right, not the partner. So things like normally are starting out really well. They're spending a lot of time together. They're talking a lot. And it seems almost inevitably with, these handful of people that I know, that they end up feeling like you said, that they're suffocated in the relationship. And they start pulling apart a lot more. And that seems to cause the reaction of, reach farther, pull harder, from the other party. And it, seems to continue in that cycle of, my friend pulling away, the partner pulling back, pulling like the relationship closer again. And then, it just keeps going back and forth between that. And as someone who's experienced that dynamic in a relationship from both sides multiple times, it's like you do get to understand it after you've experienced a bit. And what I've found from my lived experience combined with, the stories that I'm hearing from my friends, it seems very common that, this whole thing about like avoidant attachment styles and anxious attachment styles, right?
Yeah, I was actually going to say that if you didn't. So yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So it seems that these friends that I have are, they're all guys, and it seems that a lot of them have this very avoidant attachment style. And that's the runaway. And then avoidant and anxious attachment, they kind of attract each other a lot.
Sure.
Very commonly, I see so many relationships this way. So yeah, the avoidant ends up feeling suffocated and pulls away. And the complaints seem to always be different, like specific things. But the undertone of it all is, I feel that my autonomy is being taken away.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm having to do all of these things for this other person. And then the fact that they still have a problem, the underlying problem being, I don't feel connected to you personally. Whatever I do is not good enough. I do so much for you, but it's not good enough. And no one wants to be in a situation where they feel that way, right? I think that much is understandable. What I don't think is understandable is if multiple pain points in your relationship lead you to that conclusion, then maybe that's not the specific issue. And if it is, then the relationship is doomed. That just means that you two weren't meant for each other, in my opinion.
Yeah. And are you saying there's basically, if it happens that often, it's maybe with you, like a pattern or something that's going on with you?
Yeah, could definitely be that too. The specific example I guess I would give is of myself. I in one relationship did hear that complaint a lot, was that I don't feel prioritized. I don't feel like you know me for me. I don't think that you care to know me for me. And from my perspective at the time, I was like, what do you mean? Like, I pay attention to the things that you like. I pay attention to the jokes that I make that you don't like. I pay attention to the behaviors that I do that, you respond a certain way to, positive or negative. And, it took years to realize that all that stuff is just like, however well-intentioned, it is manipulation. Because it's not me being myself with the other person's best interests. It's me figuring out what do I need to do to make sure that this person likes me / is happy / doesn't leave, bottom line, right? It ends up coming from a fear of abandonment, which doesn't have to necessarily just be in romantic relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And that, like you said, it doesn't have to be in their actual relationships too. It's just, you just go through, a lot of people go through life feeling like they're misunderstood or not wanted or something with childhood stuff. All of us have trauma of some kind unless we had perfect parents, and they don't exist. So.
Yeah. Even if you have one parent who is secure, then you could have another one who's.
Yeah. And then watching them be victimized. Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to go back to, what you say about manipulation and learning what you need to do to make that person happy. I can see where she would not necessarily feel heard or like understood, or like you said, manipulation, but there's also a difference between men and women that have come into play as well. It sounds like this might not be the case as much for you, what you just described, but just women's number one priority is to feel seen, understood, and heard, and men need respect. And then just like communication styles are very different too. And women want men to be just like them. They think you're misbehaving women. And then, and we just don't get each other's like natural ways of communication. And
you could say, I don't think you understand my point that I'm trying to make. And there are plenty of guys out there who would hear that as, you're stupid, and take it disrespectfully. And yeah, and when that's not the case at all, like you're very clearly showing respect by virtue of you want both of us to be on the same page. I think that is very respectful. If I didn't respect you, I would be like, okay, you can just, keep being dumb, thinking you're dumb things,
Yeah, and I know you mentioned like the mentality or mindset, that you would offer. So what do you see?
I guess more so just the first barrier is hearing a criticism and learning to take it as a learning opportunity instead of an inherent flaw of yourself. Because, take I guess a kind of simple example of let's say you have one person who has sensory problems and they can't handle very sharp sounds, right? And you have one person who has, restless leg syndrome, and they're, they have to constantly fidget and they can't sit still. and this person is like constantly clicking a pen. Is it in spite of the person with sensory issues? No, I don't think so. Right? It's like they both have their own needs that they are trying to meet. And if the if A needs to do A and B needs to do B, but A can't handle B and B can't handle A, then that's not that B or A is wrong. It's that they're not necessarily compatible together, or they haven't figured out a way to compromise that.
Yeah, I always talk about how there are so many people that aren't right for each other that are still together and do no fault of their own. Like they just, you don't realize it right away kind of thing. But then rather than, I don't know, people will try to work it out. But if there's something like that where it may not be possible, like if one person is hard of hearing and needs loud stuff and one can't handle it too loud, like it's just, that's going to be like a long-term issue. So
yeah,
it's best to move on, but it's definitely hard for a lot of people to move on from that kind of stuff because they think they won't be able to find someone next.
Right. Which circles back into the fear of abandonment because assuming this isn't their first relationship, then every other one has left, quote unquote, right? And it's all just like a reinforcement of the same mentality.
Yeah. And I know you had mentioned too, like miscommunication and miscomprehension are pretty much like big factors between relationships, and offering that advice too. Like, what would you say?
Right. Because a lot of people say that, would agree that a relationship hinges on clear communication. Like it's going to make or break the relationship, which is true. But if both parties don't have an equivalent level of understanding, then you can communicate as much as you want. It's not going to be effective. Case in point, like, okay, example being my parents, right? My dad was working a lot because, he made more money than my mom and he was trying to support the family, right?
Yeah.
And then, 2008 and my dad had to work more. And my mom didn't feel as like seen, just, direct impact of he's not around as much.
Yeah.
And, then they started fighting a bit. And my dad hearing her unhappiness and immediately translating it to, I need to be able to make even more money so that I can provide even better for the family so that then I can be home from work more. When what she was asking for was for him to be home from work more and we'll figure out the rest. But like, I need you here with me sometimes, right?
Yeah. And that's what men live for, is to provide generally. I mean, not all men, I guess, but like according to a coach that's been on a few times, like that is the number one drive for a man, is to provide, especially in a relationship or with kids, is to provide for their family, like you said. And it's a driving factor. And then, yeah, like you said, it's a perfect example because then he's like, oh, let me work harder to make it even better.
Yeah. Directly making the problem that she was, complaining about or communicating about, directly making it worse.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And he probably heard it as like, yeah, like you said, the solution was one thing when her solution, and that comes into communication. Like not everyone, if she said, I need more quality time, I would rather make less money and get to see you more often, or say it, in words that he would really get, and, or if he could even hear it that way. Like you said, he could have taken it as criticism and then.
Yeah. Or who knows, like maybe he heard the criticism and then like, a week later heard it again, and then like a couple days later heard it again, and it's like, I have personally, and I'm not, proud of this, right? But in the past relationship, there was a point when we started fighting a lot every time I would get home from work. And it got to the point where I would start staying at work like 2 hours late every day, even just like sitting in my car in the parking garage. Just because like I was dreading going back home to,
Yeah.
experience that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like staying late at work to avoid that. You know how else you can avoid having that fight? By addressing the fucking problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so common. I mean, I think a lot of men do that, or a lot of maybe couples in general. Yeah. One will just, to avoid the fight, they like stay away, but then it makes more of a fight, because especially if they're anxious attachment style, when they need the connection. And then of course the perception of connection to women and men is different as well. So, it's pretty much like, it's amazing that people even make it. Like there's actually like secure, healthy, good relationships out there. Just the dynamics between men and women and all the difficulties. And then there's no classes for parenting. So not all the kids, a lot of kids get screwed up, and then their perception of how things work in relationships are jaded. And
yeah. And we're not even talking about when you throw in like mental illness and stuff into that.
Yeah.
You put a kid who's predisposed to BPD in an abusive household growing up, they are gonna become like a force to be reckoned with type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've done too many episodes on mental illness, but yeah, that's definitely prevalent, especially after COVID and I guess there's more people are actually talking about it now, like anxiety and stuff too.
Yeah, because my theory is that a lot more people are mentally ill than they're willing to admit. And COVID kind of put a mirror up to a lot of those people who, up until that point had been able to keep busy enough to never think about it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to point out that there is a send us a text message at the very beginning of the description, and you can use that to send an anonymous question or comment. So I'd really appreciate it. All right. Thanks. Yeah. And would you say that they're doing something about it now generally? Or, I mean, I know it's more talked about. Like, does your theory still hold, or that kind of brought it out? What would you say?
I would say that it definitely brought more exposure to the average person, which then led into it being even more talked about in general. I still think that there's a lot of work to do in terms of like stigma and acceptance. Case in point, I have ADHD and anxiety, and I take Vyvanse for the ADHD, right? Which has a lovely little side effect of spiking the anxiety a lot. And people have told me like, oh, it's like meth, it's like cocaine, you're just like doing legal drugs. And it's like, no, because I don't just go home and then like pop pills for fun. Like if I do that, I'll die, right? I take this so that I can function in a working environment that is more healthy, because up until this point I've been working in the restaurant industry for years. That was the only job that I had that was fast-paced enough to be actually engaging for the entire shift. And that was before I was medicated. But also working in that industry destroys your body, takes a massive toll on your mental health, on your like energy, and you have to spend the entire day, giving 100% of your personality to random people. And then you go home and like, what left is there to give to the people you actually enjoy hanging out with?
Yeah, especially if you're an introvert and you like thrive on recharging alone. and you just spent all that energy.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and then of course, if you have two people with mental illness, or putting them together in a relationship, like I said earlier, it's like a wonder people can get together. And maybe that's why less people are dating nowadays. Like everyone's, like the apps are becoming a pain, and a lot of people are just giving up on dating altogether.
Yeah, because there's also like much more available to the average person to be able to entertain or distract themselves. Like, I'm not, how familiar are you with parasocial relationships?
I am not at all.
So this is like some semi-recent phenomenon where basically people will find a content creator that they enjoy, which there's nothing wrong with enjoying different content on the internet, right? That's fine. The problem comes with when these people get, like, they develop an attachment towards this Twitch streamer or this YouTuber. This is where comments like, and as unfortunate as it is, but you have people who are like depressed and thinking about hurting themselves, and you'll see comments on YouTube pages sometimes that say like, "Oh, I was at my lowest, and like this content creator, your videos saved me and pulled me out of that, and I'm grateful." And while that is awesome that was the result, we get into the dicey situation of like, you feel an attachment and you feel like you give this support. There's all these emotions coming from the viewer going towards the content creator that aren't reciprocated, and like, because they can't be, right? Like, how can a content creator have that same level of a connection with every single person who views them? Like, they can't. I think that it primes people to like be more susceptible to abusive relationships where they are not prioritized or even like thought of or considered anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like gambling, where you win every once in a while, or like the small times they are nice, or even with the content creators, if they actually send a message or reply to a DM, and then they get that hit, and then they just look for the hits every once in a while, even though they're fewer and far between.
Yeah, because you don't know this person personally. You know the idea of them, and you know the image that they portray. And that can be true for people in like actual like face-to-face interactions too. It takes a long time to kind of actually know and understand a person and what makes them tick.
Yeah, especially early dating, when you're both on your best behavior.
Yeah. So I think also a lot of these issues stem from people trying to avoid hurt, which takes a bunch of different forms. But if your only concern is how do I avoid pain in this relationship, then you're not going to grow in the relationship, and you're also going to be more likely to hide things about yourself. And again, this is another example of the however well-intentioned, that's just manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like a lot of movies have that kind of thing where suddenly they'll learn something about someone and they were too afraid to tell them, and like you said, in real life too. So yeah, and then they never get the whole person, and if they wait too long to say it, it could actually be a factor, depending on how serious it is. But yeah. All right, so let's try to bring in a little bit of lightness or some positivity. Like, what are some like things you see? Because I know you, since you observe a lot, like what's some of the good you see in relationships or the potential?
I mean, I think at the core of a lot of issues is just learning to take criticism as a learning opportunity. Like, learn to embrace learning, because like, how many people have you seen that walk around with this air of like, I know what I'm doing, which, could very well be founded in something, but you're not going to know what you're doing in every single situation in every subject, right?
Yeah,
embrace
for
learning.
sure. Yeah, I'm definitely a lifelong learner, and that's my intent with this podcast too, is to actually like help people. Like I talk about, are there any books that have been helpful to you, or or any topics that you found helpful in general?
I consume a lot of like therapy content on YouTube, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, just because like you're gonna get more direct and quicker results if you go see a therapist yourself, because they're working with you and tailoring stuff directly to you, versus if you're looking up all these different videos on YouTube, and you're gonna have to take in all of that information and then like piece it all together and like take out what stuff doesn't apply to you and keep what stuff does, and how do you know what applies to you and what doesn't, and which is what I did.
Yeah.
Took a while, but I would definitely recommend seeing a therapist, because there's nothing wrong with seeing a therapist, and there's so much stigma attached to that too.
Yeah.
Like, if I go to see a therapist, then that means that I'm mentally ill, or that means that I have a problem, and I don't want to admit that I have a problem. It's like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, actually, I watched the last episode of The Kardashians, which a lot of people do. And I know Kim Kardashian just admitted to going to therapy for the first time. And her sister had been encouraging her for a while. So she was very happy that she did. And she's pretty much a workaholic, kind of the same thing. She's keeping so busy to like not think about stuff. So that was what she realized.
Like, which actually, thank you for that, because that is probably a more concise piece of advice. Is it's a lot easier to implement than spending hours researching mental issues and relationship issues and stuff. Is if you just give yourself an allotted amount of time at the end of your day, or even like in the middle of your day, whenever, to just sit and exist with your thoughts and emotions. Because at first, if you've been avoiding it for a while, at first that's going to be extremely overwhelming. But the more you do it, the easier it's going to get, and the less you'll need to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because they say you should like feel it in your body or know where you're feeling it, because the mind and body obviously are connected. But a lot of people don't know both. They might know they're angry about something, but they don't know what's underneath it and why they're angry. And it's definitely helpful advice. And I normally ask for a final conclusion, or like kind of closing thoughts. But I think that might be a good place to kind of end it.
That's about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm glad we brought up the mental health stuff as well, because like I said, there needs to be less stigma about it. And if Kim Kardashian could go to therapy, so can you. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for being on. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully people got something out of it for themselves if they're struggling with mental health as well.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
And if you like this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it, rate it as well. And at the top of each description, there's a send me a text, so you can actually send an anonymous question or comment. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Frank Talk, sex and dating educates.